are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the leadership practices, I should say, and distill from them lessons that we can then apply to our civilian businesses and professional practices. So this is my way of giving back to you, my fellow Americans who have been and continue to be so supportive of the American military during the time I was in the United States Navy and afterwards. So today I'm going back into history. So for the last week or so, I guess, I've been watching this program through an organization called the Teaching Company. A little, plug for the Teaching Company. They get some of the best teachers in the world, and they do audio and video classes on hundreds of topics, it seems to me. And the one I'm looking at is called The Other Side of History: Everyday Life in the Ancient World. And I'm at the part now where the professor who's teaching it, and I don't remember his name. He's most of these people are not famous, but they're excellent. He's talking about everyday life in ancient Greece and how virtually every male who lived in ancient Greece joined the military, typically pretty early in his life. And that military service was a profound part of being a man in ancient Greece. And so it's coincidental, perhaps, that today I'm going to speak about probably the most famous Greek soldier in history, known as Alexander the Great. And I think that his name is known, but perhaps his life not so much anymore. I know I studied him when I was in junior high school, or actually I went to middle school back in Santa Barbara in the early 1970s. But I don't know. I get the sense that no one studies Alexander the Great's life anymore unless they are studying, ancient Greek history or something like that. And it's a shame because Alexander was indeed almost for sure the most important military figure of his time. And he is one of the most important military figures in human history. So we call him Alexander the Great, but he was actually Alexander the Third of Macedon. Macedonia was part of, sort of the Greek area, we'll call it. And he was born in 356 BCE, before the Common Era, in Pella, which was the capital of the kingdom of Macedon. He was the son of Philip II, who unified most of Greece under Macedonian rule, and Queen Olympias, who claimed descent from Achilles. So Alexander was not an everyday kind of guy. He was born to the manor, as they say. But nonetheless, there's lots of people who are born to the manor who do nothing important in life. So he was highly educated by some of the greatest minds of the time, most notably the philosopher Aristotle, who taught him philosophy, science, medicine, and literature. He had early exposure to Homer's The Iliad, one of the quintessential works of the Western canon. If you have not read the Iliad, shame on you. You need to read both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Alexander read a great deal of other what became, classic Greek texts. I'm sure he read dramas and comedies and philosophies. If you watch my show Jiggers' Place, I believe it was last week I did a show on Greek dramas. I guess this is my Greek period I'm going through here. I don't know, but anyway, and he reading these sources, the Iliad, etc., really instilled in Alexander a lifelong ambition to emulate these heroic ideals. So it inspired him. It developed within him the values, the sort of martial values in the best sense, that such readings can do. And throughout his life, Alexander showed exceptional intelligence, courage, and leadership. Hence, why he was so successful. So. In 336 BCE, when Alexander was 20 years old, King Philip II of Macedon was assassinated by a man named Pausanias. It was one of his personal bodyguards, known as the, I'm going to have to read this Greek word. My Greek is, almost non-existent. He was, a member of his personal guard known as the Somatophylakes, I guess. Okay, so if any of you know Greek, please correct my pronunciation. So I just want to cover a little bit of King Philip's assassination. So we're not really sure what the exact motives were. It may have been a personal grievance between Pausanias and Philip. Pausanias had at one time been Philip's lover, and then Philip dropped him basically, and so according to Aristotle and Diodorus, it was a personal vendetta. Some believe that it was a political conspiracy, and that Olympias, King Philip's wife, and maybe even Alexander himself conspired to murder King Philip so that Alexander could accede to the throne. This is the perspective of Plutarch and Justin, among others. And others believed that it was really a plot launched by the Persians. The Persians had at that time the strongest empire in the world, but there was a lot of animosity between Greece and Persia, and it could have been on the part of Persia sort of a preemptory move to try and prevent Greece from attacking and conquering Persia. We'll never know. And by the way, it could be, a combination thereof, right? So, we unlikely to ever know what the real story is. But in the aftermath of the assassination, Alexander was immediately proclaimed king of Macedon, again at the age of 20. Olympias, his mother and the queen, reportedly honored Pausanias after the murder. And this is one of the reasons why historians suspect she may have been involved in Philip's murder. Almost immediately, Alexander faced revolts within Greece. Greece heretofore had been a grouping of city-states that prized their independence. Philip had unified them under Macedonian rule, but now that the conqueror was dead, the individual city-states got restive. And so Alexander had to move immediately to decisively crush the rebellion, which he did most famously for essentially destroying Thebes, one of the more northern parts of Greece, to deter future rebellion. So having secured his kingdom, he then Alexander then turned his attention to his father's plan, which was the invasion and conquering of the Persian Empire. As I mentioned a moment ago, the most powerful empire in the world at that time. So there were several key battles in Alexander's conquest of Persia. The first was in 334 BCE at the Battle of Granicus River. It was his first victory against the Persians in Asia Minor, what we now call Turkey, roughly. In a year later, in 333 BCE, at the Battle of Issus. So Alexander defeated the Persian king Darius III, captured his family and much of the empire's wealth. And that pretty much at that point spelled the end of the Persian Empire and the ascendance of Greece. A year later, at the siege of Tyre, Alexander put the city of Tyre under siege, and he invaded Egypt, eventually conquering Egypt. He founded what became one of the great cities of the ancient world, Alexandria, obviously named after Alexander, okay, which became a major center of Hellenistic culture, of Greek culture. And then in 331, at the Battle of Gaugamela, this was the final major victory that led to essentially the complete destruction of the Persian Empire. And so by his early 30s, Alexander controlled territory reaching from Greece south into Egypt and east all the way to India. So he conquered much of the quote unquote civilized sort of Western Middle Eastern world, if you will. So Alexander's vision and legacy, I think, are what matter to us as we look to distill business lessons from what he did. So Alexander not only sought to conquer other nations, he also sought a kind of cultural fusion to create a united empire. So he encouraged marriages between his soldiers and the local women. He himself adopted Persian dress and customs. He founded cities throughout his empire to spread Hellenistic culture, which became a blend of Greek, Middle Eastern, and Asian influences. In 326, his army reached the Hephaestus River in Indian, and at that point, his troops were exhausted and they were homesick, and they essentially refused to go any further. And so India was never conquered by Alexander the Great. Indeed, he reluctantly turned back, and he planned new campaigns from Babylon, which became his imperial capital. But from that time until his death a few years later, his empire really didn't change significantly. So at the age of 32, in 323 BCE, Alexander died in Babylon under mysterious circumstances. That was, common in ancient times. It may have been from fever. It may have been from poisoning, i.e., possibly even an assassination. It may have been some kind of pre-existing illness. This is an aspect lost to history. Having left no clear heir to himself, Alexander's empire fractured pretty quickly, and his generals, known as Diadochi, I believe. Again, my Greek is not so good. Basically divided into competing kingdoms that were ruled by his various generals. So despite his short life, 32 years old, Alexander the Great's impact was truly monumental. His campaigns spread the Greek language, arts, sciences, philosophy, and culture across 3 continents, laying the foundation for what became known as the Hellenistic Age. And his blend of military genius, his visionary ambition, his charismatic leadership really ensured he would have an enduring reputation as one of history's greatest conquerors and military leaders. So that's a kind of a brief history of his life. And as I delve into some of the lessons, I'm going to talk about some other aspects of Alexander. So let's jump right into that. So this I mentioned in the brief summary I just gave, and that is that Alexander had a clear, ambitious vision. Okay. So from the beginning, right, Alexander saw himself not just as the king of Macedon, but the ruler of a world empire. Okay. The studying and learning that he did prepared him to do that. And his vision was both clear and audacious. While the Persians had a large empire, it was really an empire of Persians, whereas Alexander's empire was really the first sort of multicultural empire. So again, Egypt, Greece, Macedonia, Persia, other peoples in Asia Minor. So he had this idea that empire went beyond just one's own people. And he was able to communicate this clear, really audacious plan to the men in his army and inspire them to follow him thousands of miles from Greece. So, to look for something comparable today, I think, we really have to look at someone like Elon Musk, for example, right? He had this vision first as part of PayPal, but then on his own, he had a vision for making a truly great electric car and making electrical vehicles a reality as an alternative to the internal combustion engine. And then he had a vision for making space travel in reusable vehicles. Eventually, being able to go to places like Mars, all through a private business, not through getting the government to do these things. Although one would acknowledge that he got huge government subsidies, essentially, that helped underwrite and his companies, especially in the early stages, so that they could get to a point of profitability. He had a vision for an internet for internet access from essentially anywhere in the world, which turned into Starlink. And now he's got a vision through X and through AI ventures, and it goes on and on. And he does not think small, right? He only thinks big. Now, does that mean that the only great business ideas are those that are so audacious that they have to rival Elon Musk's? And I think the answer to that is clearly no. However, I think what's most important is that the vision be clear and it be ambitious, i.e., something that challenges us to accomplish it. So to have a vision that's some kind of pedestrian accomplishment, that doesn't inspire people. So, what does inspire people is doing something great. It can be small and still be great. And so, I think while Alexander himself had a vision of a worldwide empire, I think the lesson that we take from it is the clarity and the inspiring nature of that vision that allowed Alexander to be so successful. Okay, let's take a break. America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. So this is Business Lessons from the Military, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. I'm talking about Alexander the Great and the lessons we can learn from this man, this great military leader who conquered a great deal of at least from a Western perspective, the known world. Certainly, China existed at the time, by the way, but was still relatively unknown to people in Europe and Northern Africa. Okay, so I talked about having a clear, ambitious vision that will inspire our team. Next, build loyalty through empowerment. So rather than ruling purely by command, Alexander cultivated loyalty by giving responsibility and trust to his officers and his troops. So he frequently rewarded initiative. He promoted based on merit, not birth. This was an unusual concept at a time when oh gosh, I went up on the word, but when uh, people, looked to either they promoted their relatives or they promoted, people who were well born in society, and Alexander really he wanted the best and the brightest, so to speak, to be rewarded, and so that's what he did. So and he allowed talented subordinates like Parmenion and Hypation and Ptolemy to lead independent commands. So it really, in the way, much more closely to the way the American military works today, where a unit leader, whether it's a platoon or a battalion, is given an objective, and then largely is left to their own planning, or the commander's planning, to determine how that objective will be achieved. Alexander, did the same thing with several of his key leaders, and so his army followed him not just out of fear or discipline, but because they felt personally invested in his vision and were proud to have his confidence in being able to craft how that vision would be attained. And I cannot stress this enough, that how important this is as a leadership lesson. So excuse me, when marched for to take an example from Alexander's life. So when marching through Asia, Alexander often sent trusted generals ahead to negotiate alliances with other peoples or to secure supply routes. And this was authority rarely delegated, I mean, by previous kings. So by empowering leadership, it created a structure that allowed him to move faster and more adaptably to the circumstances that he faced. And so I was at it was the Teton outlet, Tejon outlet mall on Sunday. So I was visiting some friends up in Fresno, and I was coming back, and I wanted to take a break from driving, so I stopped off at the Tejon outlet mall. I've driven by it many, many times, never been there. And so while I was there, I figured, hey, I'm going to do some shopping and going into various stores. And I went into the Calvin Klein store and I bought this shirt and one other. And one of the things I had found was that the merchants at the Tejon outlet mall all give a military discount. So a discount to veterans, active duty military, that sort of thing. And so, you know, being me, right? When I went to pay for my shirts, I asked the young woman behind the counter if the Calvin Klein store offered a military discount. She said, "Well, we do, but the sale for the shirts sort of preempted that." So I said, "Okay, that's fine." So she rung me up, and then she turned to me and she said, "You know what? I'm going to give you an extra $5 off because I couldn't give you the military discount, but I'm going to do that because I want to thank you for your service." Now, presumably she was allowed to do it. I assume so, right? Like a little teeny thing. But how smart are the people who run that store to empower their people to do even small things like that really touch a customer? I mean, I'm candidly not a big fan of Calvin Klein clothes. I was there. I went to take a look. I kind of like this shirt. It was a great sale, so it was inexpensive to buy it. But I'll give the store credit. It was a very nice thing for her to do. Not a huge gesture, but a very nice thing for her to do, and to show her appreciation, or to show her store's appreciation. And so I think these are the kind of small things we can do that we don't think of sometimes. I don't know if we think of empowering our frontline people, but oftentimes they can have the biggest impact on our business. I think I'm still feeling the after effects of singing karaoke until about 1:30 Saturday night at the party I was at in Fresno. So we oftentimes think of empowerment as giving senior leadership more leeway, like Alexander did with his generals. I think we, as business owners and professional practitioners, we need to be looking for ways to empower all the members of our team, from the most junior to the most senior, to having bought into our vision, execute on accomplishing that vision. And if we can do that, then we really will build tremendous loyalty. And especially for a retail business, loyalty is critical because staff turns over so much. If we can build loyalty, we can really improve the prospects for our business. Okay. Same with a restaurant. Again, turnover very, very high. So if we can do even small things that make our people feel empowered, make our team members feel empowered, we will be helping our business, we'll be helping those people, we'll be helping our customers. Everybody is will be better off. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, innovate faster than your rivals. So um, Alexander fought in the mountains of Anatolia, in the deserts of Egypt, in the jungles of India, or sort of nearby, close to India. So he had to constantly and consistently adapt his tactics to new terrain, different enemies, different cultures, and he really had to learn and innovate on the fly in order to beat his rivals. So some of the things some of the innovations that Alexander brought to warfare So when before Alexander, really armies typically relied on one dominant type of unit, and that was heavy infantry or cavalry, well, horse-mounted soldiers, basically, and they deployed in pretty rigid formations. So Alexander revolutionized this by, first of all, integrating different types of units. So, infantry, cavalry, archers, engineers into an overall dynamic system. Again, really anticipating the kind of combined arms that we started to see in the 19th century here in the United States in the Civil War, where you would see kind of sometimes combined actions between infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Okay, so Alexander did that, and that way he could adapt much more quickly to the conditions in which he and his army had to fight. So his he it's interesting because I'm just glancing at my notes, but I'm thinking back to the program that I'm watching on the everyday life in the ancient world, and the professor did a segment on being a Greek soldier, and he talked about the phalanx, which was sort of the standard unit, army unit in the Greek army. So it was basically a dense line of spearmen who had 18-foot long. They're called sarissus. And they were designed to sort of fix the enemy in place. And then he had his companion cavalry, oftentimes led personally by Alexander, that would, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? They would hit the enemy on its flank or in the rear at the decisive moment. So as the phalanxes faced off on each other and engaged, the cavalry would come in with a crushing side or rear blow, throwing the enemy into chaos. And then his light infantry and archers, they provided flexibility and mobility so that they could continue to harass the enemy even as the enemy engaged with the more heavy infantry. And then finally, his engineers were adept at building bridges and siege towers, even causeways. So, for example, at the Siege of Tyre, to overcome seemingly impregnable defenses, right? And so all of these various units worked together. And I've talked about this before, the idea that we don't want to have our businesses siloed. We want the different aspects of our businesses working together. But it's a challenge because different people doing different things sometimes use a different vocabulary, and so there can be misunderstandings because people misinterpret what somebody else said. It becomes even more difficult when you have departments, not just individuals, handling various aspects of your business. And so there needs to be some internal kind of cross-cultural uh, um, activity going on in order that the various parts of your business can work together. And then going back to the previous point, people need to be empowered to take the initiative to work with people in other departments in order to achieve whatever their objectives are. And so we want to create business structures, I should say, that can innovate faster than our rivals, and that way keep them off base and allow us to have this strategic advantage. Okay, next, we want to balance hard power with soft power. So Alexander, the strongest military of the day, that was his hard power. But he also understood the desirability of soft power. So conquest alone was not going to create his empire. He needed to use diplomacy, cultural exchange, symbolic gestures to win not just to win not just the battles, but the loyalty of the various conquered peoples, and turn them into feeling like they were part of a huge empire, as opposed to just conquered peoples. Conquered peoples are not nearly as productive or cooperative as peoples who feel that they are part of something larger. And so I mentioned earlier, after conquering Persia, instead of destroying its traditions, Alexander adopted elements of Persian dress and ceremony. He respected their gods. He appointed local nobles as satraps, the kind of governors of various provinces, along with his Macedonian officers. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and Persian women. And most famously, there was a mass wedding at Susa in 324 BCE, where he himself married Roxana of Bactria, and later Statera, daughter of Darius III. So the king that he conquered, he ended up marrying his daughter. Okay, so by blending Greek and Persian customs and culture, Alexander, as the conqueror, built bridges between the conquered and the conqueror and the conquered, right? And he potentially turned rebellion into cooperation. So that was part of the reason that at least parts of his empire endured beyond his lifetime, because he did balance hard and soft power. So when we're working with our teams, we can be very directive and sort of authoritative. That's kind of the hard power side of it. But we can also develop a culture where people see that the values of our company and our desire to empower them, to have them truly feel a part of the success of the business, is at least, if not more powerful than the use of authority in directing where the business goes. Okay, and it can be difficult because it in some ways it's easier for someone to be led by authority, because then they really, I think people, we think, well, I have to do this, I'm being told this, I have to do, I don't really have any responsibility for it because I'm just being told what to do. All I have to do is do it to the best of my ability, and I can go home, right? And that's not the way to build an agile, adaptable business, because oftentimes by the time we find out that there's a problem, that problem has metastasized into something bigger. Whereas if our people had felt motivated to deal with it quickly when it was first identified, it's a much easier problem to solve. And so that's why soft power becomes so important. But we can also use uh, we can also balance the use of soft and hard power in other aspects of our business. So we tend to think of our competitors as businesses that we need to conquer, or people we need to conquer, but that's not necessarily the case. So we can drive an entire industry in a particular direction as much by soft power as hard power. So you see this in companies. For example, I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, having been at the Tejon Outlet Mall, I was surprised at the fact that I saw little, if anything, that had been made in China in terms of clothing. I mean, there was a time then, it seemed like almost all clothing was made in China. Now it's made in places, at least the stores I visited, which included Tommy Hilfiger, Nautica, Calvin Klein. I mentioned earlier in the day, I had stopped off at an Eddie Bauer. Clothes was made in Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh. So these are all countries, they're not geopolitical rivals of the United States like China is. And by using commerce as a way to engage with these other countries, that's soft power as opposed to, military might. We can engage with them. Our militaries can engage, and that's a hard power engagement. But our soft power engagement with these countries, with these other countries, is a good thing. And in fact, that one particular clothing manufacturer, I couldn't tell you who took the lead on this. I don't know that they necessarily did, but given, for example, what's happening in China with the Uyghurs and how much cotton comes from that part of China, clothing companies started turning away from China as a source for cotton and for sewing clothing. I think because many times customers, demanded it. I know I certainly asked companies where I bought clothing about that and what was their policy, etc. And so when one company does that, that can begin to use soft power to encourage competitors to do the same thing. But if our company is the leader in using soft power to change how an industry behaves, that gives us a competitive advantage, even as other companies follow suit. Okay, so we want to use a blend of hard and soft power. Okay, next, invest in communications and culture. So Alexander founded more than 20 cities named Alexandria. Each one served as an administrative and cultural hub, spreading Hellenistic values, Greek culture, etc., architecture, education, symbolism, that unified his far-flung empire into one shared identity, borrowing from this culture and adding on to it. And we can do the same thing. So, just because I'm Jewish, for example, the dominant culture of a business that I run doesn't have to be Jewish. And in fact, I like it when the people with whom I work, talk about their holidays, whether it's Christmas, Easter, whatever. One of the nice things about the military is because there were people from all kinds of backgrounds, and so I got to learn about Muslim holidays. I got to learn, somewhat about how Ramadan works, for example. And so we can do the same things in our businesses. We can encourage people to, freely express, kind of what they're about, as a way for, our team members to learn about each other, to understand each other better. We probably don't want, proselytizing going on in the workplace, but certainly it's good for us to understand other people's cultures. So I mentioned I was at a party on Saturday night, and I met a young couple there, and both of their families had come to the United States from India. So they were both born here in the United States, but all their parents had been born in India. And it was fascinating to learn about their culture. And this fellow was the president of his company. And it was clear that he was very comfortable both talking about his cultural background and also learning about other people's cultural backgrounds. And I think that builds a stronger workplace, and a stronger team, and one where people can communicate more clearly with each other. And that all works toward the betterment of the business, because the closer our teammates feel they can be, right, the more readily they'll work together, work in concert in achieving the vision for our business. And then finally, and this may be a kind of a weird sort of business lesson, but I think we need to know when to stop expanding, right? Alexander got to India, And basically, his troops essentially rebelled and said, "We're not going any farther." Rather than push them or fight them, Alexander just said, "Okay." He realized he'd reached the limits of his people's endurance, and he realized a new strategy was necessary at that time. And we need to do the same things with our businesses. Not every business is meant to be a worldwide or even a nationwide enterprise. Okay, and there are lots of examples where businesses expand too fast, expand too far. One that comes to mind is Krispy Kreme, the donut store. They expanded very quickly back in the I believe it was 80s and 90s, and they just could not keep up with the expansion. They lost tons and tons of money, ended up having to do a huge retrenchment, and now are rethinking, over the last 10, 15 years, how to expand their business in a much more thoughtful way, right? And so, again, not every company needs to be nationwide, worldwide, even necessarily statewide. A particular one, your particular business, it may work best on just kind of a regional basis, like Southern California, or Ottumwa, Iowa. I don't know where that comes from, where a character from the TV show MASH was from. I think it was from Ottumwa, Iowa, as I recall, right? So it's important for us to understand how extended our business should be, or our practice should be. With the internet and all of these tools, it's very enticing to try and cover a territory larger than what is perhaps practical for us to do. Okay, so it's a question that deserves a lot of thought and careful consideration, consultation with our team members, because we don't want to so dilute what we're doing that we're ineffective everywhere. Better to be very effective in a smaller area than much less effective over a larger territory. So I think those are some of the lessons. Those are the key lessons we can learn from Alexander the Great and his military successes. And I would love to hear your thoughts on my ideas, and good, bad, and different, how you might apply them to your businesses. Links to all my social media will be in the show notes. Feel free to post a comment. My email address will be there as well. If you want to email me something that you think is private, happy to have that as well. So I thank you very much for joining me. I don't think I've mentioned this in a while on this show, but if you know someone you think might enjoy this show, so I'd really appreciate it if you send them a link to it. Send them a link to the show on YouTube, and perhaps I'll have an opportunity to gain that person as a subscriber and help more people, which is really what this show is all about. So thank you so much for joining me today. I got some live viewers on, always a treat. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. My guest is Anna Tran. She's going to be talking about personal branding. So tune in for that. And then on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place. We'll have a cocktail and a schmooze. So I hope you'll join me then as we head toward the end of the week. So again, thanks so much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you